All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Uli Brückner. I'm a Jean Monnet Chair for European Studies and the Academic Director at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you back after the food for some more food for thought. We heard a lot about challenges in the morning, and we'll now change the perspective a little bit to focus more on how the challenges are perceived and what do we do to win the hearts and minds, and what can we do to improve communication, because that seems to be in the 21st century of utmost importance, not only how to invest in hardware, but also how to convince everyone involved in potential conflicts, how to deal with the perception of reality. As we in academia learn from social constructivism, that reality is not only what we measure, but reality is also how we talk about it. And when we look at different times, every time has its warfare, its specific technique and way of doing it. And it seems as if at this time of the 21st century, hybrid warfare is the thing to discuss in its multiple dimensions. And what could be better to look at a multidimensional problem from a multidimensional point of view. And if we look at the region that is at the focus of this conference, then it makes perfect sense to represent the region by the various representatives that joined me here on the panel. So from left to right, it's my pleasure to introduce Rear Admiral Mitko Petev, who's the commander of the Bulgarian Navy. Next to him is Professor Mikhail Stanchev, an expert in the field of foreign policy at the National University from Kharkiv in the Ukraine. Right next to me is Gitsu Kalitze, a civil servant from the Ministry of Environmental and Natural Resources of Georgia, who first agreed to talk about ISIS, but as a man of many qualities, he stepped in and promised to give the perspective from his country on hybrid warfare. And I'm also very pleased that since we had a very straightforward male, elderly, senior perspective on security questions, that we are now slightly genderly balanced now. Right next to me is Victoria Bukatura, a program director from the Foreign Policy Association of Moldova, and a journalist based in Turkey, but of Bulgarian origin, Nahide Deniz. And last but not least, what is originally presented as an intervention at the end of our panel, but what we now do due to flight constraints, Stephen Mehringer from the NATO headquarters in Brussels came with us, and he will start with the intervention. So please, Stephen, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. I appreciate your interest and your attention in NATO's digital outreach. I also wanted to send a thank you to Solomon Passy for his support on my visit in the last couple of days, and also for his photo gallery that we saw earlier. I thought that was fantastic. It shows what an incredible life he has led. And while his hairstyle has changed many, many times over the years, his dedication to his nation is still as strong as ever. So thank you, Solomon, for all your help. My name is Stephen Mehringer. I'm the head of communication services in the public diplomacy division of NATO. My team is focused on what I call digital outreach because we're managing all of the technologies for NATO's communication for our public diplomacy. So this is social media, the website, radio, television, broadcasting, content creation, content distribution, marketing, all of the facets of our content creation as well as distribution. So it was not that long ago when Secretary General de Hoopscheffer made the comment that in terms of communication, NATO was operating in the Stone Age, that we had no ability to show our work in the field, and that we had a very weak presence on the internet. That was the beginning of the change that NATO has gone under in its communications. That's when my section was formed. My post was created. I'm honored to be the first person to hold my post for NATO, to have been brought in to make communications change happen for NATO. And I'm proud to say, in 5 years, we have changed how NATO communicates to the world. We are now maintaining pace with how the world is communicating, which is a very big statement to be able to make for the Alliance. Because typically the Alliance has run very, very far behind in terms of technology development. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our approach is one of integrated communications, making sure that we're using the right channels, using the right technologies, speaking the right languages on these channels, making sure that we are where the audiences are and not expecting them to come to us. That was one of NATO's failings for a very long time. We were broadcasting information in the NATO language, speaking in terms that the public simply can't understand, and NATO assumed that the public was interested, that they understood it, and that they would come to us. And that is simply not the case. You need to be where people are communicating, and communicating today the way the world is communicating. Next slide, please. This is very quickly a breakdown of my section. It's a two-pillar approach. On the left is the Communications Technology Center. This is the team managing the channels for our communication. On the right is Editorial Services, our team of content creators, information managers, our team of video journalists working for NATO Channel, our marketing capacity. We've also created a new post recently this year called the Head of Digital Insight. So NATO's doing a much better job of focusing on assessment and evaluation and measurement of our digital outreach, which is a requirement. If you're going to be doing digital outreach, you must be sure you have an evaluation method in place. Next slide, please. Our primary approach in changing NATO's communication has been through storytelling instead of broadcasting information. When I was doing my recruitment to take my post at NATO, and I looked at the NATO website, and the web stories would start saying, on this date, this acronym met with this other acronym to talk about this acronym project. Nobody's going to read that. Nobody is hearing that message. Nobody is connecting with that story. You need to compel people with quality content, quality channels, and quality storytelling. And that's an approach of visual, emotional, and informational. You craft your content to try to hit these targets. It's a much more natural connection with an audience. It's an organic connection. They're drawn in at an emotional level before they even realize it. And it's a much more effective way to connect with an audience. Next slide, please, I think. Is it video? Okay, oh, sorry, go back. Go back one. I need to introduce this. So go back. Thank you, sorry. So I'm going to show a couple examples, a couple recent examples from the Trident Juncture exercise that took place in October and November. 35,000 NATO troops across Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Now, until the last year and a half to 2 years, NATO's approach to storytelling was more softer, more human interest focused, sort of feature type stories. But as you're aware of the change in the international environment, the tone of NATO has changed as well. And Trident Juncture was an excellent opportunity for us to tell that story and to show that change in tone. Please.
Contact front! Contact front! Feel blocked! Feel left!
So, very short, a sense of drama. The next slide. Thank you. A bit of a sense of drama, very assertive. But is that telling a story? Did you see the story there? Because it's not traditional storytelling. But you don't want to do traditional storytelling anymore. Across any form of communication, that you're using today, videos, web stories, infographics, press releases, you can tell a story, but you have to have that in your mind in the beginning. So what is that video, that very short video, what is the story there? Deterrence, assurance, readiness, capacity building, operability. It's the readiness action plan. In 30 seconds, we're sending a multitude of messages to different audiences with different impact. So, now it goes back to another, I have another example to show as well. Come on, baby.
Special forces come from the maritime, the air, every soldier together. It's a kind of joint, unique capability, and they have the mission in general to conduct very challenging.
Obviously, we'll just go ahead and skip that. Thank you. Obviously, having a little technical difficulty there. That again was another example of the Readiness Action Plan and NATO's Special Operation Forces, which is a key element of the RAP. That video also showed our approach to production. We're using a lot of the new camera technologies to help tell our stories. We're using drones to get good aerial footage. Do we have it? Okay.
Special forces come from the maritime, the air, every soldier together. It's a kind of joint, unique capability, and they have the mission in general to conduct very challenging operations, to create dominance in a certain area where it is very tense, and they are real warriors to take on a duty if called upon by the nations.
So again, aggressive tone. Sending those same messages about deterrence, defense, interoperability, NATO's readiness to respond. And also in that video, you see our approach to production. Much sharper editing, using music that helps enhance the content, but not too much. You don't want the music to overtake the elements. The different camera angles that we're using GoPro cameras in very creative ways. We're using drones to capture amazing aerial footage. Just 2 weeks ago, we posted our first 360 video, which gives you an inside look at a Romanian MiG fighter jet in flight. So we're working on the new technologies to bring the action of the alliance to our publics. Okay, so now we're talking social media. This shows the trends for NATO from the beginning of 2014 till today, effectively. We're now well over 1.1 million on Facebook, more than 350,000 on Twitter, and just over 10 million views on YouTube. Those are really good results for NATO. I can show this to my bosses and say, see, the interest is very high for NATO on social media. The opportunities are enormous, but NATO must embrace digital as a core communications capacity to make this work as effectively as it possibly could, and as much as it needs to against our adversaries. Next slide, please. We are working to counter Russian misinformation where we can. We have our challenges, primarily in resources. Our resources are vastly outmanned by the resources that Russia has put into its misinformation efforts, both in terms of funding as well as personnel. We also don't want to get into the same game that Russia's playing. We don't want to play the misinformation game. So what we're doing is we're countering the misinformation with fact. And this is a series of infographics that we created called Debunking Russian Myths. This was created from rather mundane, generic press and media information. And my team took that information and translated it into this content. Translated that more institutional information into social media savvy content. And that's a big part of the role of my team, is translating NATO's complicated decisions and policies into a language that the public can understand. These did quite well for us. They were quite popular for a period of time. Next slide, please. We've also created a portal on the NATO website where we go literally line by line on Russia's misinformation, and we're fighting that misinformation with fact. So we show the claim that has been made, and then we show the truth, and we show the facts that prove what we're saying is true. So we're countering Russia where we can. We have to take a more strategic approach. One of the real challenges is Russia can say and do anything it wants, and no one holds them accountable. NATO and the nations, we have communication standards that we have to keep, and the second that we were to step outside those standards, we're going to be called to task on that. So that is a huge challenge. Our adversaries can say and do anything they want. So that requires us to be more strategic in how we respond in our communications. Next slide, please. Tone of voice is very important, of course. I often get the question about NATO on social media. Aren't you worried about protecting NATO's brand? And I say, no, NATO's brand can pretty much take care of itself. It is what it is. I'm more concerned that we protect NATO's posture. Know who we are, know where we stand, and be firm with that. But within that posture, there is still plenty of room for innovation, creativity, and experimentation. Here's a couple of decent examples, I think. The one on the right, the top right, is when we reached 500,000 followers on Facebook, and my team wanted to acknowledge that milestone. And so they came up with a few proposals, and we went with the, we're not cute kittens, but we reached 500,000. Thanks for watching. And of course, there was a cute kitten picture beside that graphic as well. People really liked that. They really responded to that, because they were like, hey, NATO, you just told a joke. They really connected with that. But again, maintaining it within NATO's posture. The one on the bottom right, that's the first tweet from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency when they went onto Twitter in the summer of 2014. They can neither confirm nor deny that this is their first tweet. This is the second highest retweeted tweet of all time. So think about that. The first step that the Central Intelligence Agency took on social media was a home run, because they understood that concept of tone of voice, but that issue, that idea of flexibility within that tone of voice. And then this one on the left is from the Canadian mission to NATO. They put this out last year. This went viral in Canada, absolutely. Just clearly illustrating where's Russia, where's not Russia, in case anyone along the borders there is getting lost. So tone of voice is very important. Know who you are. Know what your organization stands for. But within that posture, find the room for innovation, creativity, experimentation. Even a little sense of humor can be very valuable sometimes. Next slide, please. You have to be out in front, managing your message, your image, and your perception with these new communications channels. Next slide, please. Because if you're not doing it, you know what's going to happen. Someone else is going to do it for you. Guarantee it, especially in this day and age. The internet is full of people looking for information voids to fill for their own reasons. It can be for personal reasons, it can be for political reasons, it can be for financial reasons. But there's people looking for information voids to fill. So if you're not there managing your message, someone's going to do it for you. The NATO Facebook page is a perfect example of that. When we were looking at what we wanted to do for NATO on social media in 2010, we found a gentleman in Denmark who had created a NATO fan page on Facebook. and he would post random NATO news, and he had about 7,000 followers when we found him. And I had my team reach out to him because I said there must be a way we can partner with him. There has to be a synergy there to work with what he's already created. And he went, you can have it if you want it. I just created it because it wasn't there. So this is a guy on his own time handed NATO the cornerstone of our social media platform. The Facebook page we're using today is the very same one that he gave us in 2010. Fortunately, he was working in our best interest. Odds are if someone is managing your message for you, they're not going to be working in your advantage. So be in place first. You maintain a strategic advantage by being in place first. Next slide, please. And then it's the why. Why do we be needing to do this? First point, NATO needs social media way more than social media needs us. That's for sure. It's become a core communications channel. We now have an online community of more than 1.5 million followers. And we see the results from that in everything that we do. We get more results in everything that we do for public diplomacy because of what we're doing on our digital outreach. It requires organizations and governments and agencies to be nimble and flexible and ready to respond to the changes in the technology and the changes in the messaging. We must recognize the empowering factor of social media. It can empower an organization and a government or an agency, but it can also equally empower one single individual. And we can never lose sight of that because we never know where that one individual might pop up on what topic. Again, requiring us to be nimble and flexible and ready to respond. We recently did a review of NATO-wide communications, across the alliance, both at the headquarters, the commands, the agencies, the delegations as well. We're all taking part in this review. One of the very strong recommendations that came back was that NATO must, on par with its investment in military capacity, also invest in its communications capacity. NATO has had a tendency to build up communications when a crisis happens, and then when things go quiet, they pull it back down again. We must build a strong foundation to carry us into the future. Most importantly, governments, organizations, international organizations, agencies, we have to be able to move quickly. We cannot be stuck in the bureaucratic mud that keeps our organizations from moving faster. And all leadership must recognize that need to be quick and to invest correctly. Next slide, please. So, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and thank you so much for listening. And I wish you a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephen. It could not have been any better after lunch when the blood sugar level is not ideal to have such an energetic and very visual way of getting us back on track. I would love to start a discussion, but as I said before, we have to catch a flight. And given the fact that there are so many communication channels available, I'm pretty sure that if you have a question, you find ways to send them to Stephen.